Hey.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Um, I am Sarah. Can you see my screen okay?
We are all good.
Okay, fantastic. My name is Liz Vogel. I'm the Deputy Director for Youth and Outdoor Education Programs with the Wilderness Society. I use she and her pronouns, and I passionately believe that spending time outdoors is life changing. I spent my career to make that happen for kids, for play and work and service experiences. At the Wilderness Society, I work with partners to facilitate transformational experiences for youth on public lands and have the privilege of working on a team with amazingly talented folks to develop the public lands curriculum. I am a settler on the ancestral lands of the Abenaki people, very close to the settlement of Kuskokwak, which is also known as Claremont, New Hampshire. I respect the communities of the Abenaki people, past, present, and future, and recognize them as the original people of these lands. And Sarah, you want to do, oops, sorry, you want to do an intro?
Yeah. So I'm Sarah Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Western Colorado at around 6,100 feet in elevation in Carbondale, Colorado. I'm the founder and master educator at Wild Rose Education. I'm a freelancer, and this is the land of the Ute people. And this was the land where this was their summer land for hunting, and all kinds of sacred spaces are here. But it wasn't the place they were this time of year because it's too darn cold. So that's just, I'll do a more formal introduction in a moment, but that's where I'm at. And we welcome you to acknowledge the Native people where you are in by using the chat box. So.
All right, great. So, as I mentioned, I'm with the Wilderness Society, and the Wilderness Society was founded in 1935 and has led the effort to permanently protect about 109 million acres of wilderness in 44 states. We are committed to fighting for 30% of the lands in this country to be protected by 2030. We're committed to net zero fossil fuel emissions from federal public lands and also to all people benefiting equitably from public lands and among other key priorities that center equity and inclusion in the public lands conversation.
And so, as I said, Wild Rose Education is I'm a freelancer in the environmental education sphere, and Wild Rose Education is me, Sarah Johnson. And it depends on what day it is, what I'm up to. You can see all kinds of logos on that slide. Sometimes I'm a faculty member at Western Colorado University, and sometimes I'm a Leave No Trace master educator, and sometimes I'm teaching Arctic science. So it's all over the place, and it's pretty exciting. But that sentence there says that Wild Rose Education is an innovative environmental ed business providing place-based, learner-centered educator workshops, youth leadership opportunities, and environmental education consulting. So, thank you.
All right, so today in our workshop, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how the public lands curriculum was developed, briefly go into the structure and content of the curriculum. But the most interesting part of it all is that Sarah is going to walk you through a little bit of how she's adapted the curriculum to the virtual space, which has been incredibly important in this time that we're in. And we'll get to participate in some activities. So at the end, we'll take questions. So please feel free to type them into the chat and we will get to them at the end. So before the pandemic, we were seeing some troubling trends. An outdoor industry report from January 2020 began with the headline, "America is becoming an indoor nation." So in a nutshell, the article states that less than half of the population participates in outdoor recreation, and the number of outings among kids and non-Caucasian ethnic groups is trending downwards. We know that there's been significant increase in outdoor activity during the pandemic, and that's great. But we are not sure those trends have been impacted, and we still have an education problem. Folks generally have a lack of understanding about what public lands are, little to no understanding about how public lands actually came to be, and we have a lot more work to do to build long lasting personal connections to public lands and the outdoors that will survive this kind of pandemic lockdown situation that we're in. David McCullough, author, historian, professor, once said, "You can't love something that you don't understand." And this sentiment is at the heart of our motivation for creating the public lands curriculum. We want to, with the curriculum, inspire the next generation to feel connected to public lands. We want to equip people to teach others about public lands and highlight the importance of spending time outdoors in special places. And in all of this work, most importantly, we want to make public lands narrative more equitable and inclusive so that it's more honest and features stories and experiences of Indigenous people and people of color that have often been excluded from the conservation movement. The curriculum has undergone an evolution. And we see it as a very much a living resource that will continue to evolve as the conservation movement does. But it all started in 2012 with a very basic slide deck, which features what we call Public Lands 101 information. So what public lands are, who manages them, and what can be done, what kinds of activities can be done on them. In 2015, we revisited the concept and added in a history component that included what folks usually think of when we talk about conservation. John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt, the first national parks, etc. But in 2016, we decided to do better than the mainstream conservation narrative. And we worked with the Avarna Group, which the Avarna Group are consultants who assist outdoor and conservation organizations with their justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And we started to reckon with conservation history from a more honest place. We wanted to create something that didn't shy away from or erase the dispossession, genocide, and racism that is an integral part of the story of public lands. We also wanted to uncover and highlight the important roles that people of color and Indigenous people have had and continue to have in the outdoors. We also created something that was a little bit more user-friendly for the outdoor classroom space. So in 2018, we did some initial field testing with a handful of partners, which we'll talk about in a minute. We gathered feedback and officially released the curriculum in 2019. Taking more feedback, we revised and released a second version early in 2020. And you'll notice a theme of a feedback loop here. Feedback is critical to the work we do to maintain the curriculum. And as we mentioned before, it's a living document, and later this year, we are planning for another revision. So the public lands curriculum focuses on federal public lands. And there are 5 modules that make up the public lands curriculum. In addition to kind of the background reading, included in the modules are lesson plans for teaching lessons, as well as teaching materials in order to teach those lessons to the lesson plans. So the introduction defines public lands, identifies the agencies that manage public lands, describes different land and water designations, and explains what you can do in public lands. The introduction also acknowledges that everybody has different experiences outdoors, and really tries to hit at the heart that everybody's experiences are valid, no matter how you view the outdoors and public lands. The second module is the history module, and it sets out a more inclusive history of public lands than the dominant conservation narrative, and it places the protection of public lands in a broader social and political context. The third module, Voices in Conservation, highlights examples of ethic of conservation with a particular focus on people of color and Indigenous people. And we also share a list of organizations that tell a broader range of stories around conservation and recreation. Fourth module describes the benefits we receive from public lands and explains the threats they face and summarizes some current issues. And then the final module is a call to action and encourages participants to take action for public lands, describes designation processes, and provides some tools for advocacy. So we've been supporting educators with the curriculum material since 2018 and are really excited how youth and the conservation community has engaged with it. Each organization listed here on the slide implements the curriculum in ways that support their particular program structure and location. So in each instance, things look a little bit different, yet still accomplish the same goals: to teach youth about public lands and inspire them to care into the future. So we work with the Cottonwood Gulch Expeditions in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters, which is located in Maine, City Kids Wilderness Project in Washington, D.C., the YMCA Boys and Girls Outdoor Leadership Development, which is a nationally based youth serving program, Ironwood Tree Experience in Tucson, Arizona, and then finally the Appalachian Mountain Club, which is located in the Northeast. So in addition to these orgs, we know that professors and facilitators in higher education are also starting to dig into the curriculum and adapting it to their classes. Organizations are also using material to build out staff trainings and professional development opportunities. But really one of the great partnerships that we've built based on the curriculum is our partnership with Sarah Johnson at Wild Rose Education. Sarah's experience, her passion, and her hustle has taken the curriculum resource to another level, and we're thrilled to work with her. And with that, I will pass it to her to talk about how she has adapted the curriculum and to walk us through an activity. Sarah?
That was so kind, Liz. Thanks you for the introduction. So I'm putting something in the chat box that you don't have to, Liz, that I need everybody to open. This is a very, very interactive thing moving forward. And so if you have videos, you'll want to turn those on. If you have the slides, you're going to be ready to type on top of them. And I'm going to show you how I've taken a part of module 3 and made it something that hopefully you'll have an engaging experience with together. So Liz, if you don't mind continuing to be the slide sharer, I think we're good. I also have a phone number backup now, so if we all fall apart, I live in a small community in Western Colorado and our internet died today. So right now it's working, so we're crossing our fingers. But I have a phone number backup just in case. So what I want to do is we are on slide number 9, if you're in the Google Slides, and I want you to think about, and I want you to add to the bullet points on slide number 9. You're just going to start typing on top of there. The question is, who does the media portray as advocates for public lands today and throughout history? Like in the past, who's primarily portrayed? And just, it's a brain dump. There are no wrong answers and it's all anonymous. So we have no idea who's writing anything. So you can write whatever you want. Awesome. I see lots of participation happening. Wonderful. And actually, Liz, I think it's going to be better if you share your screen not in present mode, because I think it'll update and people will be able to see the whole thing, if that makes sense. Or we can dance, whatever you prefer. Okay, so we're seeing people writing things down here as white men, dirtbaggers, white men and women. And Luna, I'm going to ask you not to make comments on the slides, but to actually write on top of the slide. So I'm going to actually mark this as resolved, and I'm going to copy and paste your good idea over. Oh, thank you. Over here so that it's not lost. There it is. I just put it in there. Excellent. And then, so how I like to use Google Slides is if you see something that you're just like, oh my gosh, that is totally, I get it. Me too. I really, that resonates with me. I use the asterisks as like a high five. So you can always add asterisks to the end of other people's phrases or whatever they write. And if there's like a time when you're just like, oh my gosh, this word is just so important to remember. And then you can make it bold, or you can make a word a different color. Basically, you have our notes for this class. So these are for you. So when you look through this, I'm seeing some asterisks. Awesome. Okay, so we're seeing lots of, politicians, white people, people with money. I'm seeing a lot of similar things. Now, that's very, very cool. Now we're going to move to slide number 10. And I want you to think about who are the public lands advocates that are being left out. And the rule of sticky notes is that you add one idea per sticky note. And so if you see something that somebody else has written, just give it an asterisk, because there's more of you than there are sticky notes, and that's okay. So we're going to try to, come up with as big of a list of different ideas as we can. So we've got Indigenous people, people of color, absolutely. Okay, LGBTQ, excellent. Yeah, poor people. I think poor people kind of sums up a humongous group of people. People with disabilities, excellent. Trail workers, excellent. I taught this class somewhat recently, and somebody put on this slide, they said, the agency folks, the people are actually working for the agencies, the actual like federal employees that we don't get to celebrate their story very often. And I was like, oh yeah, I was one of those people one time. Okay, so we got a pretty good list here of different kind people outside of Christianity. Okay, very, very good. Thank you for participating and engaging. Um, Researchers, excellent. So this list could be, so there's all kinds of people being left out. Somebody said that nobody's being left out, and I'm going to invite you to listen and participate. And I'm so glad you're engaged in this already. I'm going to invite you to open your mind to maybe something new today, and and but come at this wherever you're coming at this from. Be yourself. So I'll be curious about the person who wrote this nobody word, how your thinking maybe changes in the next half an hour. Thank you again for contributing. So um, what I'm going to do next is on slide 11, and actually slide 12, but I'm going to share with you some stories. I would say unsung heroes. I would say people who've been bullied, people who've been left out, whatever category you want to call them. And we're just going to pretty quickly go through these slides. And remember, you have the slides, so you can always go back. And so we're going to start, and Liz is just going to click along with us, which is awesome. So we're going to start with slide 12. And so this is just a collection of all kinds of stories of people, real life, people that have contributed a significant amount. So Sacagawea is was a woman, a Shoshone, a Lemhi Shoshone woman who was instrumental in the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery expedition. And again, I'm going to go about that fast with each of these slides because I want you to talk in breakout rooms about these things. So the next one is Tai Singh, who was a Chinese backcountry cook who worked for the U.S. Geological Society in 1915 in all in around Yosemite. And there's some awesome photos there of him. The Buffalo Soldiers were also in that part of the world out in California. And they were the all African American Army Regiment in the backcountry at Yosemite and also at Sequoia National Park. And they patrolled both on horses and bicycles, which is kind of amazing. Maybe, and as I'm telling you about these people, I want you to be thinking about, who have you ever heard of before? What kind of surprises are you hearing as I share with you these slides? George Washington Carver on slide 15 is actually from a part of the world where I grew up. So I know a fair amount about him because he was part of like our elementary school learning. But he was actually this African American scientist who was born a year before the abolishment of slavery. He was all into agriculture, and botanist and environmentalist, and he was also a gay man. And that history is not usually told. And he is instrumental in soil and all kinds of sustainability in Southwest Missouri, as well as other parts of the Midwest. All right, looking at slide 16, these two people, we don't have photos of them because they were alive in the 1700s, and probably because they didn't maybe have the money to have a photo made of themselves. But Brister Freeman and Ziplah White were freed slaves who lived around Walden Pond in Massachusetts, where Henry David Thoreau was, and he had a relationship with them, which is pretty cool, and they were instrumental in some of his experience. On slide 17, we have the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, and why this is here is that there were actually a whole lot of African American men in the CCC, but they were not celebrated. These limited numbers of photos that you can find, are limited. And the African American men were just as helpful and as instrumental in the CCC as everybody else. And if you're not familiar with the CCC, this was the Public Works Project in the 1930s that many of our cabins and roads and infrastructure in public lands, pavilions and parks and trails and all this beautiful rock work is built by people in the CCC. Another interesting story that when I first learned about this woman, I decided I needed to know her. I wish I would have known her. She looks like an incredibly uh, Mavini, I don't know how you say her name. Mavini, I'm going to go with that. Vetch. And she was down in Florida, and she gave away all her wealth, including her home, to environmental causes in the 1970s. And there's this area called Amelia Island, and there's a beach there called American Beach, and it was a beach that was segregated, and so she was instrumental in advocating for those public lands and advocating for her people in those places. And I have to believe she had quite the spirit based on these pictures. I bet she was really fun. I hope she might still be alive. I don't know. Looking more at larger groups on slide 19, Outdoor Afro is one of many, 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 many examples of more of a very of a civic organization or a recreation club that exists these days for a specific culture of people. And Outdoor Afro has grown in leaps and bounds and is super effective in bringing people, African American people, together to feel safe and welcome and to play outside on our public lands. And I said that in very play outside in a it just means getting out there, right? Whatever that looks like to them, to you. Then we have Latino Outdoors as another great example for the Latinx community. Maybe you have had interactions with these two different organizations. I've only had really positive interactions with people that are involved, and I'm very thrilled that they exist. Another move, I would say it's more of a movement than a group, are the Nepentaleras, and I don't speak Spanish, so I probably just butchered that word. And I don't know a ton about this movement, and there's not a lot of information out there, but knowing that it exists and it is a movement of young Chicana women um, being supportive of each other and growing in their confidence, and it sounds like it was started by this woman named Gloria Al I can't see her last name, Enzadalva. I don't know. I'm terrible with language with Spanish. I'm sorry, but it sounds like a movement that is, to me, that sounds like it's bringing young women, Chicana women, together to really celebrate each other on public lands and hiking and outdoor pursuits. There's also, we think about groups of people. We have to think about people who are actually who are not only playing and recreating on our public lands, but are also advocates for public lands in the policy world. People recreation is one being out there is one way to fall in love with the land, and then I think the next step is to participate in public life. And so if we actually look at the data around the Latinx voter, all the statistics and data, we see that Latinx voters are very influential in public lands by how they vote. Um, Another individual is on slide 23, looking at John Francis. His story, you may have heard of him before. His story was famous in the 1970s and 80s. He was known as the Planet Walker. He walked across the United States in 1972 with this message of environmental respect, and he took a vow of silence as well, which is fascinating. So you can see there, he's a I mean, if you're walking across America, you've got to be pretty fit, but he's got a banjo and he's an African American man with a fantastic smile. I would love to meet him. We also have here in Colorado a group of people. This is a bit of a different kind of group, you might think. People that are so connected to the landscape. They are called the Acequia farmers. So down in the San Luis Valley, which is south central Colorado, there's a group of people that have been farming that land for a very, very long time, hundreds and hundreds of years, and they have a shared resource of water, and how they manage water is different than how the rest of the water is managed in Colorado and across the West. And so they sometimes get forgotten as people who have like a strong relationship with the land, but actually they're some of the people that have the strongest relationship with the land because they rely on it for their um, everyday food and jobs and livelihood, and I would guess their spirituality is tied into it. Another group is the Natives Outdoors, and this young man's name is Len. He's an awesome guy. He's doing work to make aware that they're Native young people that are young adults are, and everybody, all ages of people are from the Native indigenous cultures are love public lands as well. And he's doing it actually through a business, which is fascinating. Like he's actually got a brand and is making things like chalk bags and clothes. So that was a lot of information. You have the slides. what I want to do is you are going to participate in a breakout room. And I don't have the breakout rooms on my screen. Does Paul, are you able to who has our break no, I think Liz is our breakout room maker because she's probably the host and I'm the co-host. So when we get some breakout rooms made, what's going to happen is you and your partners are going to talk about these questions on slide 26, and you're going to have a good probably 7 minutes to do this, maybe even longer, seven, yeah. And you're going to then collect your ideas on slide 27. And that's as far as you'll need to go. Is slide 26 and 27, but you'll be scrolling backwards looking at these slides so that you can remember what was all that was there. Liz, how's it going?
It's
I can't,
going, Sarah.
can you find the breakout rooms?
No, we do not have ability to do breakout rooms, which is funny
Oh, well, that's
because we
unfortunate because
because
they
we
told us we
did.
could, but that's okay. Well, here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to open this up to conversation, but so what we're going to do is on slide 20, so let's just see the questions here.
Okay, hold on. Let me share.
It's okay. So they have the slides. So the question is I would like to invite you to, we're going to do this in funny Zoom land, as you're going to unmute yourself and you're going to talk because you're like outdoor educators that are fun people. And if you've forgotten how to be fun, I'm going to bring some spirit to our conversation here. We got to have some costumes for this because it might be a little uncomfortable. If that doesn't make you more uncomfortable, I don't know, but costumes are welcome for Zoom classes. So what I would like to do is have you use the reaction tool, or just unmute yourself and talk. And I'd like you to reflect upon this question. Have you heard of, I guess, a couple questions here. So I'd like just to reflect on this. Have you heard of any of these individuals or organizations shared in the last few slides? Did any of them surprise you? We'll start with that. And I'd love to hear from at least 3 people unmute themselves and talk, and the rest of you can type into the chat box. So who would like to be brave first? Usually in a class, we would have like built a lot of like community and like norms, and we would have talked together as opposed to just like, hi, here we are.
Yeah, I'll say something.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So I'm Gabe, and one of the groups that was brought up was the Buffalo Soldiers, and so I wasn't aware that they were a thing and a part of history, and I think it's really cool, and I wrote them down because a lot of times the young African American men that I work with, the youth, they're looking for some sort of strong male figure. That's just in the culture. If you're a strong male figure that's successful or has made a name for themselves, like that's who they look up to. And so having something like the Buffalo Soldiers to say like, well, there is something that we can look to in history to have was really cool and surprising for me.
Thanks for getting us started there, Gabe. And I will just add, there is a man that works at Yosemite in the interpretive division that is an African American man, and he does like living history of Buffalo soldiers. So you can look him up and see what, if anybody, you can all look that up and see how cool that is. Somebody else, thank you, would like to contribute. And I'm seeing good stuff in the chat box as well, so I can go both places.
I found it pretty interesting. I didn't know this before, but about George Washington Carver actually being gay. I didn't know that, and unfortunately, this is something that we see like a lot, like with like Walt Whitman and just historical figures. It's often almost hidden that they were gay, and that just, I feel like learning about this is important because it just shows it's nice to see representation throughout history, and it's now it's solidifying in a way.
That's awesome, Jordan. Thanks for speaking up. We have time, so let's say let's go for a couple more people. It'd be
Sarah, we've got a couple comments in the chat. Didn't know about the cap on African American participation in the CCC. Hearing about all these people makes me realize how whitewashed our public education history public education makes history seem. That's great.
Thanks for those comments there. Yeah, anybody else want to add to the conversation with unmuting themselves?
Hi, I'm Ellie.
Hi, Ellie.
Going off the last comment of the 10% cap on joining the CCC, and the slide said like thousands were turned away, and just to think about how many more of these like role model figures we could have in the Black community, could have had if there wasn't that cap, is just kind of like humbling to think about, that there was so much desire in that community to contribute and to conserve the land. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellie, for contributing. That's, yeah, thoughtful for sure. All right, one last person and then we'll move on to another piece of this.
I hadn't really heard of outdoor Afro before, and I didn't realize, never really put the two and two together, that there are parts of the AT that go over the Underground Railroad. So that would be really fun to check out.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I'm working with some, the big trail, they're not conservancies, they are whatever they are, the Appalachian Trail Collective, Collaborative, or anyway, I don't have the word in my head, but and I'm teaching this class with them and the Continental Divide Trail group, and it's fascinating to think about public lands and how trails cross so many different entities. I mean, every possible kind of public land, from city land to county land to federal land to private land. And then the layers of history on top of that is like, it's unbelievable. So trails have a whole nother layer of amazing opportunity for never-ending learning. Cool. So these last two questions say, why is it important to tell the stories in addition to the typical stories of John Muir, Aldo Leopold, Theodore Roosevelt, etc.? I would make "in addition" bold here. I'm going to make it bold because that's going to come up in a moment. So that's one question. And then, yeah, we'll just go there for now. I will just stop there. Why? You kind of mentioned it. You've already alluded to this, but does anybody want to expand upon why we want to the "in addition" part? Like, why do we need both?
I can share.
Thank
Brian
you.
Holcomb here. Yeah, I think it just changes our narratives around certain groups of people. Maybe there's a misconception about certain groups of people not being in the outdoors, and that's not really true when you look at history.
Right. Totally. Thanks for that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Ashley. No, you got it.
I was just going to say that it also just helps make people more comfortable in that environment. Like if they're not being represented in that environment, then it's not as inviting to them. And, you know, there's evidence that like in healthcare and stuff, people have better outcomes when they have people treating them that are the same race as them, because there's just that connection there. And when that's missing, it just like kind of feels uninviting.
Thank you, Ashley. Tim, did you want to add something? That'd be great.
Yeah, I was going to say about I struggle with the pronunciation of the Akia farmers. The
Asekias.
Aseki, that's what it is. Lynn Sinke was my professor, and she'd be upset that I can't even pronounce it still.
That's okay.
But I think that presenting those is really important, because it can broaden the perspective of what it is to manage land and how we manage land and what conservation is. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the Pacific Northwest now about like salmon rehabilitation, and also just like how we're going to approach fire management as we continue to struggle with massive wildfires, and like starting to reopen these other concepts of how land has been managed from groups that have been traditionally conserving the land for thousands of years. I think it's important to broaden those perspectives.
Yes, thank you so much for contributing that. There are so many ways to be connected to land. And I think that is so important to remember. And just because somebody is well, there's so many ways, and you can be a farmer, or you can be a You could be a geologist. I mean, and everything in between. So important. And I would say they're authentic relationships, whatever they are. They're real and they're valid. They may not be the same. They look different than mine, but that's what makes our world awesome because we're rich in diversity and unique perspectives. So I want to think about who else. This is a very large group of 47 people, and this is quite the mind hive of awesomeness. So you all bring a lot to the table from your experience. So I would like on slide 27, I want you to type in the names of either organizations or movements or organizations or, I mean, whatever you can think of that are more organizations that or people who have a relationship with either public lands directly or land in public commons that we should all know about. We just are the unsung heroes. Who are these people that you, and it can be somebody, it can be your neighbor. We don't have to even, they don't have to be Googleable. It can be anybody goes. Who else are the untold stories, the ones that we're not immediately thinking about? I mean, that are not that story at the beginning was, or that question at the beginning was like, who does the media portray? So who is not being talked about? And I would hope that we can fill the slide with 47 people, I mean, that's 45 people minus Liz and me. So with 45 of you, I hope we can fill up every bullet point there. Who else? Who else? And there's still a bunch of you that I haven't seen your faces. I hope you're out there still.
Oh, Patagonia. I love Patagonia. I forgot all about them.
That's hilarious.
You know about Patagonia, Sarah?
No, I'm thinking that's a joke.
No, they're amazing. You should definitely put that on your list to look them up.
Okay, I thought that was a joke of like play on words. I mean, it is, but it's awesome. Awesome. St. Francis of Assisi. Super. Yeah, totally. Like, I haven't seen that one show up on a list. That's awesome. All right, looking good, looking good. Okay, so I'm gonna challenge those of you who haven't added somebody to add somebody because we care about your perspective. I'm gonna get rid of that box that's obnoxious, that doesn't need to be there. There, okay.
And Sarah, can I mention something really quick?
Of course.
This is also a shameless plug for helping me with the next round of edits in the public lands curriculum.
I have lots of these slides, so if you from previous classes.
So if you as you're participating and adding links and resources and really expanding our view about who does conservation, these could end up in our next round of edits. So thank you in advance for your recommendations.
Got to lever the like I said, the mind hive of awesome people that show up for a conference like this. Excellent. Yeah, forestry technicians. I would say scientists. Could we add scientists to this page? Yeah, Black Folks Camp 2. I bet that's a fun organization. It sounds like it. Doris the Explorist on Instagram. Oh yeah, there's so many people on Instagram. That's an interesting point. Like all these people that are showing up in these Instagram accounts that have bazillions of followers. Maybe not bazillions, but a lot. Fascinating. Okay, so this is really, really good. And if you think of others, please come back to this slide. So I want to challenge us to think about, I mean, I'm about as boring culturally as it gets, right? I'm a farm kid from Missouri that I grew up on a farm in Missouri with a name like Johnson. So when we think about the broader cultural stories of the people in America who are loving our public lands, and I say that people who are loving our public lands, you don't have to be a citizen to love public lands. You don't even have to you can just be a visitor. You could just be a tourist. You can be anybody. People, we share, they're commons. They're the commons. And if they're the commons, they're as common as the Washington Mall outside the Capitol. So public lands are the commons, just like the Washington Mall is the commons. And it's actually managed by the National Park Service. So that's a fascinating side rabbit trail we could go down, but we're not going to. But if we think about it like that, that these are the commons and this is a place for everyone in America, that's how the language is written in the legislation, at least. How can we think about all the people that are more, all of us, including me? I said I don't really. I'm just kind of a boring farm girl from Missouri, but I'm not. I bring a lot to the story, just like you. And so, how do we start to honor other people's connection to land that is different than the way you do it or I do it? And we're gonna collect these ideas on slide 28. So I'm gonna give you a chance to just I'm gonna give you about 30 seconds to type something on 28, and then I'm gonna give you a bunch of ideas as well. But I'd love to see what you come up with first. How do we help honor these connections to the land and stories from peoples whose voices traditionally haven't been represented in the conservation movement? How do we elevate? I would say, how do we elevate their stories? How do we celebrate these people? Um, Awesome. I'm seeing awesome things showing up. And if you already see it already showing up there, don't feel like you have to type it again. Just give it another asterisk if you're like, yeah, me too. All right. So I'm just being quiet as people type. So there's lots of opportunity for you to contribute here. All right, I'd like to tell you a story, and then I think it'll cause more thoughts. I invite a man to my public lands classes sometimes named Bill Kite, and he is a retired U.S. Forest Service employee. He's a staff person on Forest Service for like 35 years or something. And his job was to be a person who he worked with the tribes anytime there was any kind of EIS that doesn't sound right. Environmental impact study, yeah, an EIS, NEPA process, etc. Anytime there's going to be anything done on the forest that could possibly have any impact to native sacred sites or archaeological sites or whatever it may be, he was the person who had a strong relationship with the Ute people and any others. And he was that consultant back and forth between the Ute people and the rest of the Forest Service staff. And he comes to my public lands classes sometimes, and he's telling the story. And one of the biggest, I guess, the story and the takeaway is that he makes it very clear that if we non-indigenous people, some of you may be indigenous people, and I'm so glad you're here. But when I say we, I'm talking about people like me. So I'll say non-indigenous people. A way to build relationships and to really see each other is his takeaway is you got to bring your lunch and you got to plan to stay a long time. Bring your own lunch. Like, don't expect to be served anything. Like, show up and be ready to listen and show up again and again and again. And so you bring your own lunch and you stay a long time. And I think that's one of there's a lot to unpack from that, whether it's indigenous people or anybody, is to build relationships with people that come from different cultures. I think we have to listen and listen and listen. And then the other thing we have to do is we have to be ready to share their stories with other people. So think about when you're sitting around the kitchen table, hopefully before the pandemic, when you could actually have people at your kitchen table or around a campfire, and the stories that come up and the stories that get told. And what if you inserted something like, I was reading this awesome article about this organization I just learned about, Outdoor Afro, and oh my gosh, they're doing this, and it just becomes a normal part of the conversation. Or and you start to elevate the stories of people that are not typically elevated. I think is a really genuine way to do what we can. And so yeah, I think it's celebrating other people's stories. Another way that's really concrete is, and I'm going to is to think about, there's a organization in Western Colorado. Well, it's actually part of the history world, the history Colorado state entity, but there's a museum. It's the Ute Museum in Montrose, Colorado. And there's a woman that works there, and I'm not remembering her name at this second, but she's awesome. I've interacted with her at meetings and things. And instead of just saying we're going to involve the Ute people in this public lands work, the new Friends group at the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park actually asked this woman to serve in their board in leadership. So she's part of the active decision-making process. She's not just being invited to the meeting, but she's been invited to, she's serving on the board of the Friends group for the national park. And I just think of those kinds of examples, like set the table so that people can come and be part of the leadership and not just like an extra sideline thing. So anyway, reach out to your neighbors. Totally. Like it comes down to being respectful and kind and neighborly, really, at the end of the day. So as you look at this list, I'd love for you to, if there's anything that stands out on slide 28, I'd love for you to make bold any of the words that are like the big takeaway words. Like I'm gonna make bold the words reach out. But what other words in there could you make bold that are like the big, yeah. Oh, good, I'm seeing good stuff. Amplify, research. And obviously land acknowledgements are on here somewhere, I would hope. It looks like down there at the very bottom, like going beyond land acknowledgements. I would say it's in the middle as well. I think absolutely they're important, but it's not the end all be all check the box by any stretch of the imagination. Awesome. So then, hold on, let me close the door. So with that in mind, there's some challenge there for you. There's a challenge. I have a challenge for you. Of those ideas, and maybe other ideas you have in your own head that you didn't want to type down, and that's okay. I want you to read through them and find one that you're like, yeah, I could do that. I could try that on. I could commit to that idea or that way of thinking or being for the next 3 months and see what happens. And so I encourage you to pick something there or something else. And I'm going to challenge you, if you're comfortable, if you'd like, to write that into the chat box of Zoom, the chat box of Zoom. Like, I'm going to try, I'm going to commit to, I would like to try to commit to. It's like, it's all about a growth mindset here. It's not like, and what is something you might be able to do in the next 3 months that you hadn't thought about before? And even if it's just a new way of thinking, maybe it's finding a book or reading poetry. I don't have time to read more books. I've been searching for public lands poetry by other people, by different cultures. I've gotten a little bit successful in that project. It's kind of hard to find, but yeah. So what's showing up in the chat box? Sweet, Jake. Thank you for getting us started there. Just learning more about people. Yeah, and you could use these slides to start with. Like, I want to dig in to learn more about one of the things on the slides. Even if you spend 10 minutes just Googling around. So again, I'd invite you to put that into the chat box, whatever it is. Looks like somebody over here says, I want to keep learning about history. Yeah, totally. Listen, podcasts, totally. I would just add podcasts. There's so many these days. All right, so with that in mind, yes, Luna, just totally keeping it alive, right? Keeping this conversation alive. Ooh, nice, Ellie. There's a book suggestion. Cool. Yeah, and if you are a teacher or a leader, or if you're an outdoor guide, or you have any kind of leadership role, I would encourage you to, while it's still winter and you're maybe not doing as much guiding or leading, is to see if you can find, like I said, poetry or something that you can stick in your back pocket that's from a person or people of different culture, of the non-dominant culture, that you maybe share with your clients or students around a campfire or whatever the environment is, where you have an opportunity to share a piece of artwork, a written piece of artwork. What could you be researching now that you have in your back pocket to share this summer? I'm assuming that that's what your life might involve. So just something to think about. Okay. Oh, this is great. And there's really good ideas in the chat box that you can steal from each other as well. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide and think about one other big idea. And this is the slide with all these people. So I think that I caution all of us to not forget the stories, even though there's pain and trauma and justice issues, and the list goes on and on in our history. We know that, and we know that there's also for every good story there's a bad story or painful story, and it's just human nature, and it's the way it is, and it's not okay, but it's the way it has been. And I caution against this erasure culture. That's new language. I didn't even know those words until about 6 months ago, probably, because those people were like, I mean, they're people too. Whether it's the stories, the stories that we've been learning about John Muir or Teddy Roosevelt or whoever, they're still people, and they had humongous contributions to public lands in America. And so we can't not tell their stories. However, they do not need to be the center of the story. They don't need to be the biggest pictures on the storyboard. And so I suggest, my suggestion to the world is that we broaden that storyboard to make sure they're included. So when you look at slide 29, there's like this picture that I just highlighted. I think that's John Muir. There's Aldo Leopold. There's George Washington Carver. But these are also all the pictures from the previous slides, right? There's Sacagawea and outdoor Afro. But this slide is missing some people. So what I want you to do, and is I would like you to add, first of all, I'd like you to add, if you're comfortable, you are a part of the story of public lands. You're obviously committed to public lands, or you wouldn't even be part of this conference, I would have to believe. You're here because somehow public lands are part of your life or your livelihood or your future job or whatever it may be. So I would like to fill slide 29 right now with images of the people that need to be on this included, whether it's a group that you typed into slide 27. You can go find a picture on Google and copy paste, and put them on the slide. And I invite you to put you on the slide. And I'm going to share my screen for a second because I want to show you how to do this, just in case you're not familiar. So how you do this is you go to the insert photo, and you can go search the web, and then you can go over here and say, who was the Patagonia person? Patagonia, like that? Oh, I don't know. That didn't come up with anything. Oh, excellent. Somebody did it. So we can add some, let's say, so you grab a picture if you like the picture, and you just say insert, and you can bring it over here. But then you know what? We need to resize them so that there's room for everybody. Just like I made John Muir the same size as, all these other people. So that's an awesome photo of that gentleman, but I'm going to make it smaller, and I'm going to invite you again to add your own self to this picture. Oh, good. There's a great one. I love it. That's great sense of humor in that picture.
And hey, Sarah, we have about 4 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you. So you get the idea, right? If you were, ideally all 44 of you would add a picture, and this would be an unbelievable collage of unbelievable people that we would want to celebrate. So with all of this said, broaden the story. Oh, there we go. We're broadening the story to include not just people that look and believe and have a culture like your own, but everybody's culture is welcome. And so what we're going to do here is, we told you we would have questions at the end. There's an opportunity to write some questions on slide 30 if you'd like. But what's going to happen here in a moment, on slide 32, we actually have the after party of this session, and we're going to switch to another Zoom account so that you can, we can carry on, and this conference, we can have this usually works really well. and we'll have a further conversation for 10 or 15 minutes as an after party. So don't go anywhere yet, but there's that link for in a moment. We want to finish though with the slide 31 of how to get involved. So if you haven't already, Liz is going to put this link in the chat box for downloading the curriculum. And so the curriculum is free and you can do anything you want with it. I've taken it all over the place, virtually and in person and all things. So, so feel free to do that. Feel free to email any feedback that you find about this curriculum to this email address. Liz ends up seeing that. And then if you have interest in this course, I teach an adult version of this course. I really believe it is an adult curriculum. It's based on lots of using it in the last year and a half. And so I have a class coming up virtually in March that you can sign up for. There's also going to be a course in the summertime virtually through Western Colorado University. And they're all taught as graduate classes. But the first one, you don't have to be a graduate student to take. The second one you do. The one at Western, you do have to be, or you have to have a degree. You don't have to be a graduate student. So we just thank you for your participation and engagement. And thanks for spending your hour with us. And we hope you've had an interaction with this curriculum that's meaningful. And we hope that you will, here in just about another minute, you might join us over in the other Zoom room because we want to hear from you. And I would love to hear more about you. And an hour is so short that we wanted to make sure we used it as well as possible. So I don't see any questions in slide 30. I don't see any questions in the chat box. That's surprising to me, but we're glad you're here, and we're going to sign off and go to the other Zoom room for further conversation in this little breaks time before the next session.